Hey there guys and girls, Mathis here and welcome back to another video. So, of course, you're probably going to expect this from this channel today. Yes, we're going to talk about the change to multi-boxing. We're going to do it in a hopefully sensible and organised fashion. We're going to try and keep politics and we're going to try and keep personal emotions out of it as much as possible. But I will obviously give you my personal opinion, but I'll try and keep it rational and sensible at all times. That is the key. So for any of you that may not be caught up on it, let's quickly go through what has changed and what this may let's give you guys a quick 2 minutes refresher to just sort of cover the topic to start with. So we got an update from Blizzard. Policy update for input broadcasting software was actually the title of the post. At first glance, it doesn't really have anything to do with multi-boxing, but as we read through it, you'll realise that this is very much primarily focused on multi-boxing. So let's just ever so quickly read this, and then we'll get to the good stuff. So, as World of Warcraft has evolved, our policies have also evolved to support the health of the game and the needs of the player. We've examined that the use of third-party input broadcast software, which allows a single keystroke or action to be automated or mirrored across multiple game clients, and we've seen an increasingly negative impact to the game that this software is used to support botting and automated gameplay. The use of input broadcasting software that mirrors keystrokes to multiple WoW game clients will soon be considered an actionable offence. We believe this policy is in the best interest of the game and the community. We will soon begin issuing warnings to all players who are detected using input broadcasting software to mirror commands to multiple accounts at the same time, often used for multi-boxing. It's very interesting they put this in brackets, but we'll break this down in a minute. With these warnings, we intend to notify players that they should not be using this software whilst playing World of Warcraft. Soon thereafter, the warnings will escalate into account actions, which can include suspension and, if necessary, permanent closure of the player's World of Warcraft accounts. We strongly advise you to cease using this type of software immediately to maintain uninterrupted access to World of Warcraft. We thank you for your understanding. So this very, very quickly got taken by everybody to basically mean multi-boxing's dead. They've slapped down multi-boxing. No longer a multi-boxer is going to be able to do what multi-boxers do because they have to rely on this third-party broadcasting software to be able to do it. But let's firstly look at exactly what's changed and let's break it down. In fact, I'm going to go as far as to show you my notes. Normally I don't do this for a video, but my notes are actually going to make the whole process a lot more simplistic. But what I really have to, I've really got to emphasize this. Multi-boxing is not a bannable action. It is the use of input broadcasting software that is going to be bannable. And this is a really, really strong distinction to make, and it will make a lot more sense the further we dive deep into this. But, so, what has actually changed? Well, of course, we've discussed third-party input broadcasting software will become a breach of the terms of service. Now, this is going to partly include software, things like ISBoxer and HotKeyNet. Now, if any of you have looked into multi-boxing or even multi-boxed yourself, you'll know that these are realistically two of the main pieces of software that most people will look at using to simplify the process of multi-boxing. But by all means, they are not entirely required. They just simplify the process. They equally have a lot of other features and functionality rather than just this ability to broadcast your input on your keyboard or on your mouse across multiple clients. They offer a whole bunch of different suites of information and functions, and it's going to be interesting going forward whether you are literally just not going to be able to have this software running on your computer, or whether Blizzard are going to be actually able to specify the difference between the input broadcasting software and any other features that these bits of software have. But as you can see, we will soon be issuing warnings to all these players who are detected using input broadcasting software. This is intriguing because both of these pieces of software are or do have this function to them But like I said, they have a lot of other functions as well. The way that Blizzard have communicated this is a little bit ambiguous and is somewhat open to question. That's what I'd say. And the fact that they've said that this is often used for multi-boxing, it's quite clear that it's obviously used for other things as well. But some things to specify. The use of multiple accounts is still fine. Primarily, as you know, on this channel, I focus on the economy and goal-making side of World of Warcraft. And one thing that is heavily suggested by virtually everybody that has some sort of passion for making gold in this game is that having a second account just to run your auction house sort of stuff. You can leave a toon sat at the auction house whilst you're out doing world quests or queuing for Battleground, for example. That is still perfectly fine. There is no issue with you having multiple accounts. The issue is down to you being able to use a bit of software that translates one action that you do and sends it to multiple accounts at the same time. That's going to be the problem. So, like I said here, account sat on the auction house is fine. If you have a second account doing world quests, that's fine. If you have a third account that's just sat waiting for a BG queue, that is also entirely fine. That's potentially 3 accounts, but that's A-okay. There's no issue with that. Another thing that's a little bit more difficult for some people to get their heads around is that if you see a bunch of druids running around, all following each other, doing their herbalism or doing their mining, that is still fine. That is still acceptable. That is not a TOS issue as far as Blizzard are concerned. The simple truth of the matter is it's just going to be slower for them than if they were using some software to help them out. This is where it's a bit... it's a bit ambiguous. This is the problem. But let's have a look. What does this actually mean for people? Well, this means that multi-boxing as an entity is not necessarily against TOS. But one big problem I see with the way that Blizzard have worded this new policy is that it has very much painted a target on your head if you are multi-boxing. In recent times, anybody that's multi-boxed will be very, very aware of the fact that very quickly you'll start getting very abusive whispers telling you that you're a bot, telling you that you're scum, telling you that you should quit the game, a whole bunch of things. I mean, this is the internet, this is the gaming, this is partly gaming culture. This has to be expected. But the problem is now anybody that is legitimately doing multi-boxing without using any additional software is still going to be subject to this abuse from other players in game. Now, admittedly, you would hope that that wouldn't lead to anything, but the problem is that we've all heard of these occasions before where multiple people right-click report somebody and that player then gets suspended without them actually necessarily doing anything wrong, simply because of automated systems. It's a bit of a shame that Blizzard have worded it this way and pinned a target on multi-boxers, but we just have to accept the facts. So it also means that the difference between a regular character and a bot is much greater, and I think this leads into a big reason to why Blizzard have had to undergo and make this change. It's going to be significantly more simplistic for Blizzard to be able to detect whether a player is just multi-boxing or whether a player is potentially botting. And if anybody that knows much about the botting side of World of Warcraft and games online in general, it's kind of a cat and mouse game. It's often a situation where the bots learn how to do something, and then Blizzard learns what it is they're doing, and then stops them being able to do that. But then, as those bot companies realise that, okay, well, now the game company knows we're doing this, we'll find some other way to do it, and it's this constant sort of cat and mouse game between the two. If it's made much more simplistic for Blizzard to say, well, this person is using some sort of broadcasting software, and we've now said that's against TOS, regardless of whether they're just multi-boxing or whether they're actually a bot, Blizzard can just ban them without having to do much additional research or due diligence. That's a big change, I think. That disparity between a good player and a very bad player is being increased. And thirdly, one thing that obviously from a channel like mine you would expect me to talk about in a little bit of detail is that materials are going to see a small raise in price. And rare items are arguably going to be slightly rarer. But my real thought on this, if I'm honest, is that eventually it will all balance out. It's a supply and demand game ultimately. If there's a large demand for an item, the price of the materials for that item are likely to go up. When the price of those materials go up, it's likely that many people are going to see this, and they're going to either decide to just rummage through their guild bank and clean it out and dump it all on the auction house for some potential quick gold sales, or they're going to go out and farm it, which then in turn brings the supply back into line with the demand. It balances out itself eventually. There's a few significant changes that are going to happen from this. Why do I think that this has been changed though? As I've sort of briefly touched on already, it's going to make it significantly easier for Blizzard to ban bots, and I really wish that Blizzard would have emphasised this in a little bit more detail in their post. The disparity between a regular player playing the game and a bot is now considerably greater without this kind of this kind of middle ground that was a bit of a grey area. Remove the grey area and you can see in 2020 vision again. This means that Blizzard has some software called Watcher, I believe it's called. It's software that runs in the background that is designed specifically for detecting sort of automated and bot related activity. The likelihood is in the past that the multi-boxing software was becoming so sophisticated that it was starting to look remarkably similar to what the software that bots were using, and it was becoming harder and harder for Blizzard to actually ban the right people, if that makes sense. But this game of cat and mouse should hopefully be a little bit more simplistic for Blizzard, and in reality that is absolutely a good thing for the game. Secondly, it's going to slice the pie more ways. It basically means that it shifts the potential goal making options in the game quite heavily. Instead of, as I've said here, instead of one guy supplying all of the materials needed to meet the demand, it basically means that 3 or 4 players can all sort of dive in on that, and it gives a slightly fairer approach to sort of gathering and that sort of thing. And thirdly, the biggest reason I think this has changed, and Blizzard actively said this in their post themselves, is it reduces this negative impact. In fairness, negative impact is about as vague a statement as you could possibly make. It's not pinpointing one thing over another, so we are somewhat speculating in this case. But if Blizzard think there's a negative impact to it, then it's their game. That's totally fine, and it helps fight what I've claimed to be an increasingly growing fire. As multi-boxing has become more simplistic for people to achieve, more people have taken it on board to do it. It's for the most part become a very optimal way to make gold in this game, emphasising more people to go about doing it, and the negativity towards it is obviously been increasing at that same sort of rate. Public image is key for Blizzard nowadays. They're about to launch an expansion. Their public image is not great right now, considering they've just delayed that expansion, and people are very concerned that it still doesn't feel ready. Let me put it that way. So the public image of maybe they wanted to just, this is a real tinfoil hat thing, but maybe they wanted to do something that they absolutely know that the majority of the population of the game will get behind, and it really sort of helps boost their public image just before we go into an expansion. But that was just, for the most part at least, factual information. What has changed, why I think it has changed, and what does it mean for people. Now let's get on to the stuff while you subscribe to this channel. Goblin mode activated. How can we as goblins in World of Warcraft or part of the community that enjoy make gold, how can they use this? What does this mean for us specifically? Well, the viability of gathering has just gone through the roof. As it stands currently, one of the most, certainly the most advertised way of making gold, and one of the more popular methods of making gold, is quite simply raw gold farming. Just smashing your face on a keyboard, killing mobs, often in very, very low level zones, making it completely mind-numbing to do, is ultimately ended up being one of the most simplistic and most entry-level methods of making gold in this game. But realistically, it's not something that Blizzard like people doing, for many reasons. One, it's just not fun, and Blizzard don't want, or theoretically shouldn't want, you doing things that are not fun. There are many other things in this game that are not fun that could counteract that argument slightly, but the fundamental point of them making a game is that it should be fun and enjoyable. And smashing your face against a keyboard is arguably not very fun for most people, but people felt that they needed to do it because it was the most viable way to make gold. And as I've stated, there was many instances where you could realistically get sort of between, or it was at least advertised that you could get anywhere between sort of 15 to 20k gold doing some raw gold farming methods every day on many different YouTube channels and blogs and live streams. There are different ways about doing this, but in reality you are usually getting a very small amount of gold with then a couple of potentially slow selling items that as and when they sell might assist that total, but realistically the performance of raw gold farming is quite slim. But with this change, it really increases the viability of gathering again for a lot of people, and Blizzard likes people gathering. It's more engaging. It means you're at least doing something in the real world. You're navigating around. You might come across a rare mob. You might be completing some world quests at the same time. You might be leveling a character while you do it. There's the chance of engaging with other people. It keeps you primarily in the top level zones of the current expansion. There are lots of benefits in Blizzard's eyes of people gathering over and above raw gold farming. And when realistically you're looking at similar amounts of gold, that's slightly less often the case by the time you take in your auction house cuts and time to actually sell it on the auction house. But on average, given the choice, most people would probably rather do some gathering than they would raw gold farming. So it's the increased viability for gathering is really good. So if you haven't got your druid with herbalism and mining ready for the Shadowlands, now is an absolutely cracking time to get them leveled up, get them some good sort of gear on. The more powerful they are, the quicker they'll cut through any mobs that they accidentally aggro. Really good time to do some gathering. I've put a little indicator here, or a little example of why I don't think that the amount of materials is going to change in too much of a drastic fashion, because this relates to supply and demand. But whereas with a multi-boxer you might have just that one character farming up very large quantities of materials, posting them on the auction house and pretty much saturating the market with just their materials, whereas now it's going to be more of an incentive for people to go out and gather. But of course, one person on one character is limited to the amount that they can obtain, but it gives more people a chance to do it, which ultimately though is going to mean that a similar amount of materials. So don't be too concerned about there being huge scarcity of materials all of a sudden. Don't worry, there's plenty enough people on all of the servers to make sure the materials are there. Secondly, second Goblin mode activated tip, market resets are going to be made considerably much easier now. Auction house goblins can rejoice. I myself am one of those people that I'm quite happy to sit at the auction house for a few hours and sort of buy a few items, sell a few items, do some flips, maybe try and reset some markets to make some gold that way. It's an element of making gold that I've always enjoyed, and a lot of other people share that passion. Now, the response time to price resetting is now higher. What does this realistically mean? Well, let's just cover what a market reset is in its fundamental terms. If this is how your auction house looks, you've got a few herbs listed for 10 gold, a few more herbs listed for 13 gold, and then a whole bunch of herbs listed for 15 gold. An auction house goblin might come along and they might buy out the first two stacks of those. They might buy out the 10 gold ones. They might buy out the 13 gold ones, leaving just the 500 original herbs at 15 gold. That auction house goblin can then post their 500 on top of it, leaving just 1,000 of that herb up on the auction house at 15 gold. Previously, there's always been the opportunity that a multi-boxer could look at this and go, wow, there's a huge gap in the market, run out for an hour, reactively farm a whole bunch of that herb and put it on the auction house. Whereas without a single person having the ability to gather that many materials in such a short period of time means that the chance for that market reset to be completely crushed back to where it was before is now a lot longer. Now, that's not to say that there's not another auction house goblin that already has a guild bank full of these herb flowers and is able to do just the same as what a multi-boxer could have potentially done, but it does, if anything, reduce the chances of it. So yes, market resets are going to be considerably more viable. My third point is that rare items are likely to be rarer for longer. Now, first thing I wanted to stipulate about that is that do not buy out commonly multi-boxed items. This is things like the BFA World Drop mounts. You're all aware of what those four are, I would imagine. I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but Golden Mains, the Blood Feaster mount, there's a couple of others, you know them. The Pack Mule, whatever the other one is, June Scavenger, there we go, there's all the four. Don't be buying those out and thinking that they're all of a sudden going to completely disappear. You have absolutely no idea how many of these items that these multi-boxers have in stock. Anybody that's seriously spent time and focus on multi-boxing has likely got half a guild bank worth of these mounts. The fact is that you just don't see them because they only put one on the auction house at a time and wait for it to sell. So yeah, be careful with buying out things that are commonly multi-boxed, but as we go into a new expansion, Shadowlands rare items, if they decide to actually add any, are going to potentially stay rare for longer. If there is any bind on equip epics that we can get from gathering out in the world, if there is any BOE mounts that we eventually stumble across, these items are going to be they're going to stay rarer for longer, simply on the basis that there's not really any straightforward, simple way for people to go about farming multiple of them like there was with this multi-boxing in place. So rare items are likely to stay rarer for longer. This may even translate back into sort of like lower level transmog items, but maybe less so than sort of current content stuff. Once again, you've always got to think about just how many of these transmog items do people actually have in their inventory. But sales of potions, flask and basic consumables are going to increase. Now, as much as I don't believe that the material market is going to fluctuate in much detail, what I do think is that the regular consumables, especially as we go into the first raid of Shadowlands, is going to see a dramatic increase in sales as to what it has previously. Simply on the basis that guilds would often create a lot of these consumables in-house. That's not to say they're not going to do it going forward. It's just what they would often do is have a few members of the guild go out, do some multi-boxing, get all the materials, and then somebody else in the guild would craft everything they need. It basically meant that most guilds were able to somewhat create a nice little bubble for themselves, very rarely having to venture onto the auction house to get the items they needed to complete the content that they were trying to achieve. Take out one of those steps of the process and it means that your flasks, your potions and your basic consumables, that includes all of your feasts, your food buffs, this sort of thing, is more than likely going to see a little bit of an increase. The difficulty is that we're also about to go into a new expansion, so we just don't know what the sales are going to be like on these things in the first place. There's a lot of speculation to this, as you can probably tell. But finally, crafting is going to feel that little bit more expensive. While supply and demand will balance itself out naturally over time, you've always got to consider that there's auction house goblins out there, and what they're going to do is they're going to do their very best to keep the material prices high. They spend a lot of time focusing on buying the materials when they hit the market at a low price, and then they are quite happy to drip feed them back into the market at a higher price. Auction house goblins have a lot more chance to have a say on the value of items on the auction house, which in turn, when it comes to crafting and especially going into Shadowlands, when you level up your professions, things are just going to feel that little bit more expensive. It may just be a feeling. Once again, it's something that's going to be very difficult to put actual data to, but just be aware that as we go into Shadowlands, be prepared to spend a lot of gold if you want to level up your professions quickly. So what are my final thoughts on this? My final thoughts to wrap this video up, as I appreciate it's been a long one now. Multi-boxing is an interesting and challenging way to play the game. One of the things I used to enjoy more so with multi-boxing than anything else was putting together teams of 5 players and trying to solo dungeons. That was really fun for me. It was an interesting challenge to try and make sure that you had a tank and a healer and a couple of DPS and it all synergized and worked together. Unfortunately, without the use of any sort of software to assist me with this, it's going to be not impossible, but even more considerably difficult than it was in the past, and something that, when you add on to the cost of buying those extra accounts and the time of leveling up the characters individually now, is probably not something that many people are going to be interested in. But on the flip side, if it does help Blizzard actually reduce the amount of bots in the game, then yeah, it's definitely a worthwhile sacrifice. I'd be very happy if we could flick a switch and all bots disappear. But yeah, we'll have to see. So markets are going to change a little bit, but not in a huge dramatic way, as it just shuffles around the valuable things for people to do. It takes emphasis off raw gold farming quite considerably, puts that emphasis on gathering instead, and it gives a bigger emphasis to auction house goblins to have a strong hold on how their economy works on their server. But the last and final thing I want to say on this point, guys, is if you see multi-boxers out in the world, remember, multi-boxing is still not against terms of service. Only the use of software to aid them in that adventure that they've chosen to go down is what is against terms of service, and you as another player have no ability to see whether they're using software or not. So please don't harass multi-boxers if you see them out in the world. I shouldn't have to say that really, but you still see it happen all too often. But yeah, so there's my thoughts on the multi-boxing mini crisis. Let me know in the comments down below if it affects you in any way, what your thoughts are on the matter, as there's a whole bunch of different opinions on this. But please do your best to keep it civil, otherwise I'm going to have to go through the comments and do a load of deleting, and I don't want to be doing that. But guys, hope this has been helpful to you. Give the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you're new around here. There's a whole bunch of new people watching my content recently, which is great to see. Really happy to have you here. But guys, I'll see you guys next time. Peace.